There's plenty up front here. I'm going to get started. I think we have a very exciting session this evening, and I want to dive right in so that we have plenty of time for discussion and questions as we go on. A couple housekeeping items as we get started. First of all, I very importantly want to acknowledge our sponsors. Tonight Holiday Inn and Suites is a sponsorship over on Broadway. Mish Bio and Spark both provide very important support for our group, and Brinkshofer has been an ongoing sponsor for BioArbor. So thanks to all of them for helping make this possible. We are always looking for new sponsors. There's sheets on everyone's chair regarding how you can get involved, and you can go speak to anyone on the steering committee if you have any questions about that. The steering committee folks are the ones who have green borders around their badges, or their names are listed up here. The steering committee people are also the folks who do the hard work to put these events together, picking the topics, bringing in the speakers. If you have ideas for other topics, other suggestions or feedback on the on how we operate, please come talk to anyone listed here. I want to take a brief second to do a little advertisement for next month's event, which I think is going to be particularly worthwhile coming back for, and I'm going to let Jack Ball come up and talk about that.
I'm not sure how many of you have had the opportunity to pitch your business to a VC. The best I can say is it's interesting, it's exciting, and you never know what to expect. Well, I've been thinking about this topic, I guess, for, what did you say, about 3 years we've been talking about it. And so finally we've got enough time and distance with the company I was with for the last 5.5 years, Accuracy Cytometers, to give you a chance to see what it's like to pitch to a VC. We're going to have the CEO at the time, Jen Baird, come in and give the pitch that she gave in 2007 to two of the principal investors and one angel investor. That will be next month in December. And what's going to be interesting about the program is that she'll give the pitch, the VCs will ask the questions as VCs are wont to do, and we'll ask the audience to raise their hand and say, stop. And why did you ask that question? What were you looking for? So it's a chance for you to get into the minds of the VCs so that when you have to pitch to a VC, you've got a little bit more ammunition. So I hope I'll see you next month for that program.
This is an opportunity to see behind the scenes in a VC pitch like I don't think ever has been put together before, just because it's pretty hard to construct this sort of thing. And kudos to Jack for pulling together all the original team involved in investing Accuracy to allow this to happen. So do make a point of coming. But tonight we have a pretty remarkable session in and of itself for our good, bad, and the ugly. This is an event we've done every single year at BioArbor. This is our fifth year in a row of pulling together 3 experienced CEOs to tell stories. Everyone up here has been involved in multiple companies over their careers and has many goods and bads and uglies to share. So we've set this up in a very casual manner. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a minute. Then each of them are going to go through a couple do's and a couple don'ts in starting a new company. And then we're going to open it up for questions. So think about questions now. We do want this to be really interactive and a lot of fun too. So casual opportunity to hear some true stories and experiences from folks who have been there, done that. So without further ado, we'll do a quick round of introductions. All right, Bill, you're first.
Oh, yeah. My name's Bill Greenway. I'm currently the CEO of Delphinus Medical Technologies. We're a company that is developing a novel breast cancer imaging device based on some technology from the Kermanos Cancer Institute. It's a startup. We raised an A round of funding of $9.5 million about 1.5 years ago. Prior to that, I ran 2 other startups, one called Infomed, which I started up in the late 80s and ran for about 13 years. And then also a company called Lodox Systems, which was another startup that started up around, I guess, 10 years ago or so now, and is still out there operating. And then in the middle there, I was also VP of Business Development for a company called Hologic, which is a larger sort of manufacturer of breast imaging equipment. and then prior to that, spent some time at General Electric when I first got out of school.
Hi, I'm Kevin McKern. I'm the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Grand Valley State University, and I just recently took that position this summer. But prior to that, I was the president of a molecular profiling company that was a spin-out from the Van Andel Institute in Grand Rapids called Intervention Insights. And for a couple years, we took it from a concept to most recently a $7 million A-round funding that included a couple of VCs, Berengia and Chrysalis Ventures. And it is still under the process and continuing to develop and has a strong future. It's more of it's more a bioinformatic play than that. But the reason I got into that was because prior to that I had been involved in biotech, and that was in Louisville, Kentucky. I was involved with a company called ReginaCyte, which was a company that was with some license and technology at Washington University with partners with retinal surgeons that with an enzyme that would cause a posterior vitreous detachment, which you would use for in a surgical, sort of pre-surgical, or it could also be used as a preventive for diabetic retinopathy. And we can talk about stories of that. Before biotech, I've been involved in a number of startups, healthcare services primarily. I was originally with Humana in Louisville, and that's how I got involved into it. And got involved in biotech and kicked myself around for a while. Then decided to get back out. So, thanks.
Hi, I'm Dan Calvo. I'm sort of coming home here. As you see, I'm currently living in Kansas City, so I guess I get the award for the furthest traveler. We're a cancer diagnostics company there. We went commercial 2 years ago, and that's when I came in. So I'm a little bit of a different duck than the startup CEO. My 3 CEO positions, including one here in town, I came in behind the founder, if you will. And, that has its own interesting and opportunities for everyone. So there's a lot of founders, a lot of smart people in the room, and starting up a company, I've never done it. I don't know that I could, but there's different things you need to do when you scale and go from a startup to something bigger, and that's what I've done in 3 different places. I got a lot of basic training at DuPont, and DuPont used to be a top 10, believe it or not. Now they're not even at the top 500 anymore. But when I was there, they were big. And it was a great training ground. I'm primarily a commercial guy, as you see here, sales, marketing, and I've had manufacturing experiences too. I guess what I would look forward to is giving you some insight into a person that came in behind the founder, and maybe as well what I found in those situations.
Okay. Yeah, here's my quick list of do's, which it's hard for me to see because they're over there. But, first and foremost, have a great product, especially if you're looking for VC funding. And, I mean, companies are very different, and people always, are starting up companies for lots of different reasons with lots of different purposes. And so I always talk about what is it that you want to start up for. And I think I'm going to address sort of starting up a company that could be VC funded. So, if that's what you're looking to start up, you need to have a great product. You need to have a product that's exciting, can be protected, and has a big enough market presence or possible market presence that VCs are going to really be interested in. And so I think that's number one. Number 2, get a great team. I mean, once you have a great product, you actually have to go out and get a really good team of people and put them together to kind of make that happen. Next, focus, and it's often very appealing not to focus, especially for scientific people. You come up with a great technology, it's really interesting, it can do everything in the world, but VCs don't want to hear that, neither do good commercial people. They want to pick one particular area, one particular market that the product is most leveraged in, and focus like a laser on that area and try to push it out in that arena. 4, face the truth. no matter how good it is and no matter how good your team is, there'll be a lot of significant bumps in the road. And you have to be willing to face them. You have to be willing to sit there and go, this really isn't working out the way we thought it was, and change direction, make changes, make, differences. And the hardest of those, I think, are often to change people who are on the team. Oftentimes, people who start with your project aren't the people that can finish the project. And so you've got to face into the truth, whether that be what you're doing or who you're doing it with. And then finally, I'd say keep the constituencies informed. And I really mean all the different constituencies. If you raise VC funding, make sure you keep your VCs informed, keep your board of directors informed. If you're working with a clinical partner, make sure your clinical partner is informed. And obviously, and maybe most importantly, make sure that all the people working with you in the company and on the team are informed all the time. So those are sort of my top 5 do's. Top 5 don'ts. First and foremost, and I've raised money and worked with the VC community on the East Coast, on the West Coast, here in Michigan, and actually even in Europe, and believe it or not, in Africa. And having come to Michigan, the biggest mistake that I see people make in Michigan is focus and fiddle with the valuation. And that is often deadly. I've actually had 2 instances where I was working as a consultant and had rounds of financing put together for companies here in Michigan, ready to close, but they kept fiddling and arguing and wanted to negotiate on the valuation, and things happened. And in both cases, those rounds blew up because things happened. In one case, that thing was 9/11. In another case, it was the scientific founder dying. But, those may be extreme examples, but I know a lot of other examples where somewhat lesser things have happened. But I can guarantee the longer you let that clock tick, the more the odds are of losing your money. And money is oxygen. You have to have it to succeed. Second one is kind of in that same vein. Don't run out of cash. Awful lot of companies just go down because you run out of cash. You really got to manage your cash well. Get in a rut. Again, oftentimes, scientists come out of an institution, have a certain way of thinking about things, and you can get too focused in that direction. And one of the things you have to do to be a successful startup is exploit opportunities. And almost no matter what you think is going to work when you first start out, you often wind up with something at least slightly different, and sometimes completely different, is what really hits. So you really don't want to get in a rut. And again, this gets back to focus. Don't try to do everything. You can probably ignore a lot more things in a startup than you think you can ignore and still survive and still get out there. You really have to look at what are the things that are really important. Make sure you do those well, and kind of the rest of it you can kind of just let go. And then finally, I just throw in there, forget to have fun. I mean, it's really a lot of work to do a startup, and if you don't have some fun, you're probably not going to really get there. So those would be my list.
So most of my experience is actually with startups, and that's actually my strength. I know, I've worked for the guys that know how to execute, and so they're the ones I want to hire once we get the thing established and a good business model. But I kind of broke mine down in sort of major categories. The first thing is choose your partners carefully. It's taken 10 years to get anything from concept to any kind of funding situation now. You're going to be living with these people for a long time. And, if I would have known that, I would have spent a lot more time, dating them for a while. And in fact, in the first spin out with the retinal thing with the guys, I had 3 retinal surgeons as partners. I only needed 1. But every time, and every science, every bioscience has, there's always, the CEO, and then there's a science guy, and then there's always a finance guy eventually. And then you start building out the team there. But, so every time we were dividing I really was, when I'd look at dividing it and trying to raise money, I was sitting there saying, I treat you guys as one, but they'd all treat themselves as equals, because then so it was really got difficult in trying to to raise some of the capital and divide it up. And it took a long time to work through that thing. And under strategy, again, when you got 10 years in front of you and we don't even do business plans anymore. We do business models because you're constantly changing your model. You're constantly changing to the environment that's around you. And the only thing that the future gives you is the unexpected. So, your strategy has to be prepare, think about the unexpected, be prepared for the unexpected, and then adapt based upon the unexpected. And don't lose focus of where you're going. Finally, never stop raising capital. Like you said, the way I talk with startups is you're broke. You just don't know it yet. You don't know when. You're gonna run out of money sometime. So you're broke. Start spending your money that way. And by the way, don't ever stop raising capital. Every time I pitched for Intervention Insights, the people who funded me were always I had pitched to the earlier time, because they're and I have invested in. I got probably a half a dozen biotech companies I'm invested in, either through personally or through angel groups, and I do the same thing. Well, hey, that's a nice pitch. Let's see if you can really live your truth, and then I'll invest in you. So you're always pitching, one time ahead of you. The other thing is assets. When you're in a bioscience or biotech company, your asset is your IP. Your management is there, your IP is there. You've got to protect that. That's basically what you're selling is that piece of paper. So you've got to constantly protect it. The Regenocite product, the enzyme which we inject in the eye, is a great product, extremely effective. But we screwed it up with IP. And a matter of fact, one of my 3 partners actually published before we were, and the whole issue around that company was getting more IP because the IP from Warshu was too old. And we couldn't get a pharmacy partner without more and extended IP. And we were just getting ready to file and went back and found out an abstract he had published out of paper. He wanted to get his name out there, and it killed it. And that cost $300,000 just in that year alone. So, and then community. You're not in this by yourself. You gotta, it's a constant process of networking and collaborating. You're not actually competing until you really get out there and sell a product. So, continue to collaborate. If the future is uncertain, if you have to basically expect the unexpected, you don't know who your partners are going to be with. It's like working, when I worked in Catholic hospitals, you always treated the nuns nice because you didn't know which one was going to be your boss the next day. So, and it's the same thing. You never lose fact that you'll be collaborating with somebody in the future. On the don'ts, kind of change the same thing. Even though you have to be careful who you choose, you also have to be careful not to settle for mediocrity. In biotech companies and bioscience, we have a tendency to focus on the science. But in reality, if you're going to be with someone for 10 years, you got to know they're a good partner. So you can't sit there and say, oh, I love that person's resume because they're a good scientist, because they got great technical experience. You got to make sure that they are someone that you can live with for a long time. The other thing is, again, you can't, under strategy, you can't get complacent. You can't sit there with this business plan and think, we think we've got the answer, because I guarantee you, you don't. It's going to change. Something's going to change. But more importantly, if this business, and we can talk about what I consider a broken system now, the way we're doing it, but if you're going to be in a business for 10 years, it's not the fact that your business is going to change or you're not going to execute. It's that the world around you is constantly going to change. Someone that you didn't project in your business plan is not even there yet. And so that world is changing. So you always have to, you can't be complacent. You always have to have an edge. You have to be paranoid to a certain degree. And going back to the finance, like I said, you're broke. You just don't know when that time's come. And again, with the assets, never publish before filing. Again, that's an expensive one for me personally and for our group. And then again, finally, you're not doing it alone. You got to bring in partners. You got to continue to collaborate. Again, most companies now will go through a series of management. Matter of fact, in Intervention Insights, one of our pitches was, here's our management team today, here's the management team tomorrow, and here's the management team then. So, you're really going to, you got to plan for a change. And the fact is that you're going to start. You got to be like a good athletic director. You got a Rolodex that you know where the next coach is that you're going to hire when the other one gets fired. So.
Okay, well, I think you'll see some common themes, even though, again, my situation, as I said, in my 3 CEO roles, including my current one, I came in behind a founder. So I came into an organization. In one case, the organization had downsized from 300 people to 50 3 months prior to me showing up. So you can imagine morale, where we'd taken this company. The second was, sort of a company that was sort of stuck in the mud over the last few years and needed something else to take it to another level. And the third, where I am now, is basically taking that idea, that startup idea, and commercializing it, both commercially and operationally. And so those are 3 different situations, but I think you'll see some common things, maybe some different ones. So, when I come into a company, there's people there, and they have their experiences, and they have what they've done to get to wherever they are. But it's important that, I didn't walk in there with a game plan necessarily. I walked in there with what I wanted to learn in the first 90 days. And I think that's the important thing for me is I literally had almost a spreadsheet of what did I want to know about that company, the people, the processes, the customers, the competitors, things as simple as I wanted to make sure I get to a trade show to see the market, to see the competitors. I want to see the top 3 customers. I want to see a customer who left. Lists like that, literally, so you can really get a map of who's doing what inside the company and out. Very detail-oriented in that first 90 days, too. Ask a lot of questions, get to know the nitty-gritty. Tell people you're going to do that because, and I can tell you I've learned from this in 3 times, the first time I was at that, they thought, oh, we've got a micromanaging CEO here. This is not going to be good. But I wasn't trying to micromanage. I was trying to learn their business, part of their business. And so I told people up front, this is what you're going to see me asking a lot of questions. I'm going to dig into your face over the next month, 6 weeks. That's why I'm doing it, not because I want to take your job over. This was reflected by a number of people. Know where the cash is going. And from the past, but also project it. And more importantly, know how to flex it. Whether that's, in one case, we had written off inventory that was worth about $5 million. These were instruments that we're going to scrap. Well, I said, wait a minute, there's $5 million sitting there, even if it's a fraction of that. We turned that into sales. And a lot of people didn't want to do that because they were, well, is that really the right thing to do? $5 million. When you're in a situation of a relatively new company, you don't walk away from $5 million if it takes a little bit. Maybe it's a student body left, but it's still $5 million. This was brought up too. Know your leadership team, and there's no doubt you'll probably have to make some changes. And in my situation, coming in with the founder, I mean that's a unique situation, and it's important that if you are the founder. And, at some point, you may need somebody to replace you as you look at your own capabilities and your experiences and what your company's going to need. And I'm sure your board would give you that guidance. So, that's not necessarily something you do on day one, but I think there is that sort of succession planning for yourself. And so when I came in, I had to deal with a team. And more likely than not, there's going to be changes going to be required. And deal with them, obviously fairly, respectfully, but deal with them. Don't let them linger. And the other thing, and again, this is part of that sort of 90-day process, find ways to build trust with the people involved, whether it's your employees, your staff, some key customers, board members, investors. You've got to find a way. You've got to take action. That trust doesn't happen. And that will do you in good stead. I mean, if you want to call it, you're building shits, whatever you want to call it. But it's about developing relationships with people that are going to make a difference to you and the company. And you have to go out and find ways to do that. As far as, what not to do, don't come in with all the answers. I mean, I learned that the hard way, I can tell you. And just because something worked at company X, well, I'll do that the next time. There's too many variables. Things change. So you don't come in with the answers. and not only to fix problems, but where's this company going to go? I think somebody said it. I mean, the environment changes, and you'll change that company based on a lot of factors, some of which are out of your control. You need to have contingency plans. I mean, because something goes wrong all the time. Don't make your bets on the best case or even the most likely case. Have a contingency for the worst case. And whether that's with cash or with people, if people crash or people leave. Somebody talked about the Rolodex. I think you need to have certain ready plans that aren't necessarily going to be used. Hopefully they're stay in the can, but have them in the can. And don't delay critical decisions. Again, whether it's on people, whether it's on what the exit for your company should be. Do your work, have it worked out, and if you don't like the answer, it's probably still the right answer. And if it's a hard, if it's a hard decision on a person, or it's, boy, this is not the right thing to do, waiting is usually not a good thing when you've got your facts done and decisions ready to be made. Don't hunker down in your office or in your house, or be visible to people and reach out to people. Find a mentor, find a colleague. Could be somebody on the board, could be a relative that's been in the business, somebody that you can bounce ideas off on that might be crazy. But that's really helped me over the years, and I'm continuing to look for mentors even after a few years in the till. And finally, and this was something that I know I personally was aware of. I grew up in DuPont. DuPont was very process oriented. GE is the process company, and there's a place for that. But you can put processes into a company that have 3 rooms and 10 people, and it doesn't make sense. But I've seen people do it. I've seen people come in because of where they came from and instilled that. And, more often than not, it doesn't work. So just be cognizant of what you are bringing in if you come from a big company, in a case like I did at least.
Thanks so much. That's fascinating. I think it wasn't a huge surprise probably to me and others to see that the dues are people and cash. And it's not surprising that all 3 of you had on your dues to focus on people and cash. But I found the variation, and we purposefully didn't share their slides with one another so that, there would be some overlap. And I think that does show you that people and cash are probably king. But beyond that, there's a lot of variation in different ideas. At this point, I'm going to bring my co-moderator up here, Bill Brinkerhoff, who is the co-founder and COO at Serenus, and got stuck on a plane, so was running a little late for the intros to run the Q&A session. I have a couple, Bill has a couple, but I hope all of you in the audience do too.
So thank you, Julia, for saving me. I was taking your focus on fundraising a little far and tried to take one more meeting this morning in New York and got stuck. So I think we'd like to go ahead and open the floor for questions. And one question I had is, there's, I think, an agreement on focus, and how do you get entrepreneurs to focus, I guess, is an area that I was just wanted to hear some examples where you've had to kind of bring a focus, and how do you go about doing that as a CEO of a startup organization?
Well, that was, I think, one of the issues in one of the startups that I came into, the one that had grown. They had grandiose plans and had raised, the good news is they raised a lot of money. The bad news is they burned it all, right? Seriously. And then that is a whole valuation issue down the road. And so, more money is not always the answer. But, they were just, basically, we just kill programs. And typically, to kill programs, you kill people. And I mean, I don't, you know what I'm saying. I mean, that's not always the right way, but sometimes, in the case of this company, it was the only way to do it because it was just too much burn and too much. And the other thing that what happens, and somebody talked about change of plans. I walked into this company thought that the company Salomex was going to be a $200 million company in 3 years. The board, I mean, smart people. Really smart people. When you looked at what the company really could do, I said the market's not that. It's no way. So you've got to understand what your market opportunity is. Pick one that's a decent size, but make it real, and then just focus on that. And because not focus, you'll spend money and get nowhere.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would say is if, and again, I'll put this out as an if you have the right board, sometimes exposing the entrepreneur, founder, scientist to the board in the proper way can help sort of create that focus. Oftentimes if that person or persons weren't overly involved in the financing process, getting them more involved in that and getting them more involved with interaction with the board sometimes will help bring that together. Because if you do have the right board and the board is focused, which isn't always the case, but is at least usually the case, that can help kind of instill that focus on the people inside the company.
Well, actually, I'm more the entrepreneur guy anyhow, but and I've found nothing more focusing than the fact is that if you don't do your job, this thing's going to fail, and more importantly, the people you've convinced to come along with you are going to you're going to fail them. And the most important thing I think is, particularly in early startups, is that you don't try to get too far out. You always kind of keep that 30, 60, that 3-month and 6-month plan out there, and just sort of that's where you got to go. It's the process going next step, look, adapt, move forth, doing it again.
Great, thank you. Julie?
Question, Bill Greenway, you had on your slide, focus was one of your do's, but basically don't be too focused as one of your don'ts, or don't be inflexible as one of your don'ts. I'm paraphrasing, but as an entrepreneur, where do you draw that line between being too focused but not being flexible enough when you might need to be wearing losing the blinders and not realizing that you should be changing course?
I guess I don't see the two things as mutually exclusive. You can certainly focus and be flexible. It's kind of like you're walking down a path and that path is moving around, whereas to me being defocused is you don't really have a path. You have sort of a whole wide variety of things that are out in front of you with a little bit of the shiny ball syndrome. It's like, oh, that would be interesting, that would be interesting, this would be interesting. So you focus, but you don't focus to the point where you neglect to at least look out there. And while you're going down that one path, as things come up, you adjust that path.
I have a question. Dan, on your list of don'ts. On your list of don'ts, you said don't. I think it was don't hunker down. Can you give some examples of what hunkering down is? Because in some cases, hunkering down might sound like focus, but it isn't a good idea.
No, what I meant by hunkering down is basically, living in your own world. Mm-hmm. Trying to just sort of put the company on your shoulders, and especially if things are going tough or the fundraising isn't going well, people tend to be less visible because they're afraid of telling people the truth. And I mean, that's just, that just creates all kind of issues. Again, depending on the size of the company, maybe 5 people versus maybe 50. But when you have some issues to deal with, that tends to be when people sometimes just kind of hide in their office or work out of their house. I mean, I've seen people do that. And I think reaching out, letting people know, and as somebody talked about, letting people know where you are, is to me is always the best way to go, and I've seen that work, and so that's what I meant by hunkering down.
Thank you.
And reach out, ask for help. I mean, find that mentor, and again, wherever you can find it. I mean, it could be a board member, it could be a colleague, or somebody from your past, or somebody that says, talk to Joe. I think he might be able to help you. Work through a problem, bounce some ideas off of. I mean, it's good to have somebody you can do that with.
I have a question for you about how to maintain good relationships with your boards or your investors, but really both of those. And I don't know if you can share any of what you found works particularly well in that area, or may not work as well.
Well, I mean, under promise and over deliver, but I guess that's an obvious one. Yeah, to just have your like I said in the one example of Solomix, they had plans that they were just it was amazing to me, and I didn't know that they were amazing coming in terms of being just way out of base. But basically you do some market research homework, and then you have it's about having facts, standing by those facts, and saying, given this is what I'm going to deliver, and then it's really that sort of red, yellow, green kind of scorecard. I found those work with boards really well, so they know exactly where you are at any moment in time and what you think is important. And they're simple charts, but they work.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that, and I think those are great suggestions and things that are critical, but it's really helpful if you can put yourself in the mind of the people on your board and try to think about when you're going to tell them things, particularly when you're going to tell them bad news. It's easy to tell them good news. That anyone can do that. But when you're going to tell them bad news, and you always have to sometimes tell them bad news, try to think through what the implications are, but particularly for them or the constituency that they may represent, and then think through what the implications of that are, and maybe have, if not answers, at least have thought through the things and kind of discuss it with those people. And so I found that, for instance, if things are getting delayed and you're getting near a next round of funding, you may talk about, well, what implications does that have for the critical milestones to do this next funding? And get out in front of that and discuss that and the implications of that. Don't just sort of throw it out there. So if the board members then realize that you're kind of thinking through what their issues are, that tends to create a better rapport than maybe just putting those things out there.
A quarterly written report's really what I expect as most an investor, and then if I was a board. The other nice thing about it is that it changes the conversation when you meet the CEO anyhow, because the first thing someone's going to ask you that's invested in you, how's it going, and how you doing on plan. And so if you've already told them by newsletter, you avoid that whole conversation. They can start talking about sports and family. So.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, just another comment on the board. I think if you can find a certain person on the board, so you don't necessarily treat them as a group, you can get somebody that's maybe a little closer to you, has a little more time to spend with you, maybe you click more with. And I've found, sort of an insider approach helpful in my examples.
Thank you. In the back.
The topic of cash being cash strapped. Could you give examples from your own experiences about how you kept the company moving forward, how you made progress without necessarily always having the cash to, sufficiently develop the product as you would ideally like to, paying people, paying partners, consultants, how are you creative in dealing with the cash situation?
Personally, I've worked for many months without taking a paycheck or taking any money, and I would expect that from any of my management team who comes in and are part owners of it on a startup company, particularly when you're doing it. And the other thing is, you need 6 months to raise cash, period. So you should always be raising money 6 months ahead of time. You shouldn't be waiting until 2 or 3 months, or you're going to end up doing, like you said, ended up with cash. And then the other thing is you're going to use everything that you got, which is, you're going to ask your vendors to hold back, and you'll fund it through that. You'll cut costs, you'll do everything. The balance sheet and income statement will tell you exactly where you need to go. And even if you just keep it alive with a sliver, so that you're making progress, you can still keep telling the story. But if you're within 6 months, you got to keep raising cash.
Yeah, there's, it all depends. Part of it depends on what stage you're in and where you are. If you're at a baseline early stage startup, I think those are great suggestions. If you're further along, I think, Dan, you had said, sometimes you can sell stuff. You may have things that are sitting there that may not be, you may not realize what value there is, but sometimes you can sell those things. I've gone to companies that leased equipment. They'll buy your equipment, lease it back to you, and you can liberate cash sometimes that way. If you have good relations, particularly with key suppliers who you may need to float you along, those are the kind of things that you need to set up ahead of time. Get a good relation with them, present to them, give them the same kind of presentation that you'd give to investors so that they feel invested in the company. And then when things get tight and you go, hey, could you hold off? We can't pay you for the next 3 months. They're much more willing to do that than if you just show up out of nowhere. They've never seen you, they've never talked to you, and now you're like, oh, can you help me out? So I think if you get out in front of those things, that certainly helps a lot. Those would be a couple of the kind of suggestions that I'd have.
Yeah, and one that I have not had a lot of experience with, of course, are SBIR grants. I mean, and I know that a lot of people, probably people in this room, have had direct experience with that. I mean, you don't want to get off track with your company, but sometimes cash is more important than total focus. As you said, you might have to do both. And there's a lot of those opportunities out there, and I'm sure there are people here that are much wiser than me in terms. So I know a lot of companies that have done that and done it successfully.
The most recent company that I was with, we had some pretty nice sized investors. Grand Rapids is well known to have a couple of wealthy families in there. It's always great to have one of them on your board too. So, particularly if they're heavily invested in the company. So.
When you have IP that supports multiple diverse applications, is it sometimes feasible to have it developed under a common umbrella almost by different groups and different companies? And have you had any experiences of that sort that might work out well?
I haven't directly, but I have seen other companies. I mean, typically the companies that I've seen that have done a good job with that, and I've certainly worked for some companies as consultants over time that have done that, is if you have IP that supports multiple applications, you have to really kind of choose one that you're going to develop and then try to license the others out or create some sort of a deal. I've actually seen people who have bootstrapped and financed companies by licensing that IP to someone else to pursue a parallel market. So, there's a lot of opportunity in that arena, but I think it's critical to get those things sort of offloaded to someone else that can develop them and hopefully do it in such a way that you can pull some cash back for the mainline objective that you have for your own company.
We did that specifically. We had two IPs that associated with the enzyme, and of course we took the one that was going to get us to market faster with cash faster, and then licensed off the other one. But the nice thing we built into it is that we built in a window that if we could come back in and buy into it. So that's all negotiated, and it's time and circumstance specific. So.
Jack?
Bill, you mentioned as one of your business-based truth. I'm curious to hear a case where you ran into that situation as well as other panel members in facing the truth or unfortunately not facing the truth and the consequences.
Well, I've got one going on actually right now. I won't go into details, but And this gets all into kind of the culture where we've had some people who were with the company sort of before the beginning of the company and were with the project early on and came across, we all thought that they could do a particular job, and they can't. And we all like the person, and so we've kind of kept trying to train the person, bring them along, make lots of suggestions. And then recently we brought in another individual, someone you know, actually, and he came in and said, "What the hell are you guys doing? This is crazy." And we were all like, "You're right. I mean, we're deluding ourselves, and now we're going to have to deal with it." So that happens often with people, but sometimes it'll happen with products where you think a product you think that a certain way in which a product would go out there, particularly, and I've seen this a lot where I've worked with physicians, and physicians are involved in the company. They look at a particular feature or a particular item and go, this is really, really important. And then you start to roll the product out, and sometimes these features require a lot of engineering, a lot of product costs. And you roll your first 20 or 30 products out, no one even touches that feature, uses it, or even cares about it. And all of a sudden, you're like, we need to dump this. And, everyone's sitting there, but, Jack or just so-and-so said this is like the most important thing. But they're the only person in the world that sees that. And oftentimes then you've just got to go, whoops, we got to cut that off and move forward. But those are two instances that I've seen personally.
Yeah, a couple of different things come to mind. I mean, it happens a lot, first of all, unfortunately. Part of it is the people. People that have been there from the beginning that, again, I didn't know, but, they were part of the founding team. And it's just not where we need to be anymore. I mean, and it's tough. And it's probably tougher for the founder than it would be, say, for me in that sense. I mean, I'm anything but cold and heartless. I mean, those are tough decisions. And seriously, they're tough when people have given that and built it from a garage to a basement to now a building. But, those are decisions that are made and need to be. And, I'm not going to get any specifics, but there's a lot of them. Probably in every company, those are things that have to happen. And then sometimes it's, what are we going to do with the company? I mean, one of my examples is, been there a while and we got it going, cash flow, and we said, okay, where can we really take what we have? Realistically, given the competitive environment, what competitive advantages do we have? Where does IP fit? In this case, it didn't. And we said, you know what? Let's get this company as kind of juiced up in the next 6 months best we can, and then find the right suitor. And that's what we did. And so far, it's worked out for that group. But those are just what you do as a leader, and have a team with you. I mean, you're not making these decisions on your own.
Kevin, any comments?
No, not necessarily. I think they did a good job.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, Dan, you kind of addressed this, but you're basically like a turnaround person in my mind, in a way.
One of them was. It's sort of different flavors of that. But I'm with you. Go ahead.
The 3 companies that you were involved in, how did it turn out was one question. The next question is, you do all this work, and when do you say it's just not going to work as a company? I'd like to know about that process. You talked about it, but even all of you. Mm-hmm. And then what's the process quickly of maybe going the other way and saying, maybe I can't even sell it, maybe there's just nothing here?
Well, so yeah, the first situation was, the turnaround. I walked in, as I said, from 300 people to 50, and burning, I forget, $10 million a month. It was ridiculous. Money, it would just make your hair fall off. And so there, it was about focusing on what we could sell, what the right products were, how big the market really was, and then it was blocking and tackling. It was pure commercial execution, and then getting a couple of key products out faster than we thought by dropping these other 8 programs. And that exit worked out really well, both for the investors and the people. And I think that's important. They've got a great home. They're bigger than they were, if you will, when I left. And I look at that, and they're still a market leader in a big company now. Assay Design's here in town. Founders did a great job, built it from scratch, and sort of hit a wall. My job was to try to break it to another wall. And, based on the competitive environment and what the products were and everything going on around it, and, how much money we were realistically going to put in. And in the course of that, I built a new leadership team. And one thing I've found as I've gotten older is and I think somebody put this, I was much more akin to hiring people like me. That is the wrong thing to do. Bring people around you that are very different and maybe even uncomfortable for you. And, I've brought people on teams like that now. And so with that team, we went in a very thoughtful way. It wasn't, well, let's sit down. What can we do? We went through a process, actually brought in an outside consultant to help us kind of walk through this. It wasn't big money with that consultant because we knew the answers, but we wanted somebody to sort of get us, to sort of assess it in a thoughtful and, I guess, third, distant way. And we came up with the conclusion that, this is what we should do. We sold the company, and it was okay. But the point is, the company's doing well now. I mean, Enzo, and I was just over there today, and they've had their ups and downs, but they are the North American headquarters for manufacturing. Those are good things. I mean, I really like to be able to say that about the two companies, at least, that I was involved with. So that's how we did it. And the second one, bringing an outside person, did help.
I'd comment on that too. I think to some extent being a CEO is like being the captain of a ship. And ships, like companies, have owners. And I think the most important thing, and this is a little bit of facing the truth too, is you need to inform the owners, whoever they happen to be, whether they might be you and other people, but generally it's not just going to be you, it's going to be a bunch of other people, as to what's possible. Like, what are the world of possibilities of where this company could go? Can it be an IPO? Can it sell? Are there possible suitors for it? Or is it, well, it might employ 12 people, but it's never going to go anywhere besides employing these 12 people. Make everyone realistically look at the world of possibilities and then jointly decide on, on where you want to take the thing. Because the worst case scenario is owners who are uninformed and think it can go somewhere that it can't, or conversely, just basically taking it and then sort of trying to get it there, but it's just a place where it can't go. You've got to make sure they're informed, and then you've got to make a decision that's in line with what's reality.
I've never seen a situation where a company hasn't been shut down for, first of all, because they run out of money, and that forces the issues and the question of, one, is the business model broken? And the science not any good? So the other reason why you shut them down is because you fail your trials. So those things always drive it. So you run out of cash, then you got to sit down and say, and really the question is, would I put my own money into this thing to keep it going? Do I believe enough in the science and the market and the model behind it that I'll put my own money? And if you can't say that, then you're not going to get anybody else to put any more money. And typically that, crisis is not a good reason to invest in anything. So that's the last time you want to be raising any money. But it's always you run out of cash first.
The focus point, which is very valuable, but if you're so focused, and in this case, this was an instrument company I was on the board of. I had come in sort of late as an independent board member, and at that point they were selling a handful of instruments. So the pipeline was everything. That's all anybody ever talked about on the board was the pipeline. I mean, Jack knows what I'm talking about. And it was always delay, delay, delay. Well, I mean, you go to a board and say this delay, delay. You do that 6 to 12 months. I mean, and you don't have really good answers other than, well, it's funding. Every delay was a war story, but they were all the delays, and it was every month or every quarter. And the investors, basically just gave up. And I think it would have been a wiser decision had they not delayed that 12 to 18 months. They could have had a more organized sort of, I'll call it next step, whatever that exit would have been, than sort of at the last minute saying, okay, I've had enough delays, it's over. I mean, it was literally that ugly.
So I get the signal. I think we have time for one more question. Yeah. So the question is the balance between building the intellectual property portfolio and then executing and taking those patents and creating the programs or products.
Well, first of all, I see a lot of good intellectual property and ideas and such. And by the way, in today's market, the concept of IP is probably not as important now as it used to be in science. It depends upon how far you're going out, if you're going with pharmaceuticals and such. But if you're executing on some of the personalized medicine where it doesn't involve as much IP associated with, execution is the process and such. But it depends upon the specific around it. If it's a life science that you've got to take out to a pharmaceutical, yeah, the reason why we were trying to get new patent on the enzyme, it's great science, is because we didn't have enough length to get to a pharmaceutical who was our ultimate buyout. So, I mean, it depends upon the situation, but, you got to really weigh down, you got to lock in IP, and then eventually, execution is going to be super critical. And that's why most companies are not done by founders. They're done by, CEOs or managers.
Yeah, what I would say is you have to, when you do a startup, the purpose of doing a startup generally is you want to create value. You want to create value for yourself, the investors, whatever. You really have to look at what's the right strategy to create value. And that really depends on, even in the life sciences, it depends on what kind of company it is. In some companies, creating value may be just creating IP and getting it to a point where that IP can be sold. And in other cases, it may be all about execution, and the IP is really a secondary issue. So it's all about creating value, and what you have to do is make sure your plan addresses creating value, and then those decisions fall from that plan.
3 companies I've been involved in where we pitched early stage companies, finance early stage companies with IP, and we never even got to the question of execution until they basically had their IP attorneys look at how strong the IP was around it. So.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we'll bring the panel to a close. I really want to say thank you for sharing your wisdom. The stories that you bring to the table are extremely helpful, I think, for all of us that are working on trying to bring startups forward. To hear the perspective, to hear what's worked, what hasn't worked is great, and appreciate the time you've spent to come here to share that. And also, to you have joined tonight, thank you for coming out. And I think we've already talked about the next program, so we'll bring it to a close. Thank you.